All right, so yeah, thank you. Attraction through formal resemblance, 5 case studies on constructional contamination. Now, when you first read the title of our talk, either in the program or just now, you were probably wondering about two things. First of all, what on earth is constructional contamination? And secondly, why should I care about it? Well, to answer the first question, constructional contamination is a usage-based mechanism that creates lexical biases in morphosyntactic variation. So if you have a piece of morphosyntactic variation, you have several morphosyntactic variants, you often find that particular words appear much more often with a particular variant and much less often with the other variant. That's what I mean by lexical biases. Words having a preference to appear in one particular morphosyntactic variant. And constructional contamination is one mechanism that can explain the emergence of such lexical biases, that can explain how they came to be and can also predict which words would prefer which variant. Now, as for the second question, why should you care about it? Well, there's basically two reasons why you may care about constructional contamination. The first is that you're interested in language variation and you like to score a quick publication. As I'll explain in a minute, constructional contamination is a very general mechanism. It should be applicable to a lot of case studies and also makes a number of very clear predictions. So that makes that you can probably just take this mechanism, apply the predictions to your case studies, and then test these predictions, write a paper about it, and bam, you've got yourself a publication. That's great. But even if you're not interested in language variation at all and you don't care about publishing, then you might still be interested in constructional contamination if you're interested in language processing and the effects that it has on the language system. As I'll explain in a minute, constructional contamination is crucially based on the theoretical assumption that language users are capable of storing larger chunks of language, so multi-word units of language, as unanalyzed wholes in their memory, and then also accessing these chunks of languages when they're producing language themselves. All right. Now, the research that I'll be presenting to you is not just my own work. I've got a lot of help from my co-authors. My co-authors Isabeau de Smet and Freek van Velde of the University of Leuven. Isabeau should be in the audience somewhere, and Freek could not be here. I believe because he's getting his second vaccine shot. Also, big shout out to Gert de Sutter and Tom Ruet, who helped us by giving us access to some of their data that we could use to test our predictions based on constructional contamination. Now, a quick overview of my talk. So first, I'll talk about how constructional contamination works, just on a general level, so in theory, basically. Then I'll review the case studies that we have on constructional contamination, and then I'll end with a quick recap how you can apply constructional contamination to your own case study. All right, so first of all, how does constructional contamination work? So the first step in constructional contamination is that you need a piece of morphosyntactic variation, so a morphosyntactic alternation. For instance, in Dutch, we have the part of genitive construction, which is a combination of an indefinite pronoun and an adjective that together form a noun phrase. So for instance, iets leuk, something fun, or iets verkeerd, something wrong. Construction runs entirely parallel in English. Now, the fun thing about this construction in Dutch, however, is that in Dutch, it appears both in a variant without an S ending and a variant with an S ending. So you can have both iets leuk and iets leuks, both meaning something fun, or iets verkeerd and iets verkeerds, both meaning something wrong. So no meaning difference or anything. All right, so that's step one. Step two is that you also need another construction that often looks like one of the variants on the surface. So for instance, Here you see a sentence containing a partitive genitive. Ik heb iets verkeerd gegeten. I've eaten something wrong. So iets and verkeerd together form a noun phrase, just as in English. And they do so in a partitive genitive construction, right? First the indefinite pronoun and then the post-modifying adjective. Now here you see another sentence that does not contain a partitive genitive, but rather it contains an adverb. It's a construction with an adverb. Ik heb iets verkeerd verstaan. So literally I have something wrongly understood. I've misunderstood something. Verkeerd here is an adverb that modifies the verb verstaan, understood. In this case, we do not have a partitive genitive. However, on the surface, these two sentences do look alike a lot, right? I mean, apart from having a different verb, they seem identical on the surface. Now, this superficial resemblance, because that's all what it is, it's superficial resemblance. They're completely different constructions from a structural point of view. The superficial resemblance is only present for the variant without S ending. When you add the S ending to the partitive genitive, you can clearly see the difference because the S ending is only possible with actual partitive genitives and not with any other construction in Dutch. All right, so that's step 2. We have another construction that often looks like one of the variants on the surface. In this case, it looks like the variant without S ending. All right. Step 3 is then that other construction is particularly frequent among some lexical items. So for instance, it's highly frequent among verkeerd. So you very often hear things like, ik heb iets verkeerd verstaan, ik heb iets verkeerd gehoord, geïnterpreteerd, etc. So I've misunderstood something, I've misinterpreted something, misread something, misheard something, etc. So it's highly frequent with that adjective. While it's much less frequent with, say, leuk, fun. It's possible in principle, right? You can have sentences such as, je hebt iets leuk ingepakt, you've wrapped something up in a fun way, but in practice, they're a lot less frequent. So less frequent with leuk. Now that means that language users very often hear the string iets verkeerd, something wrong, without the S. In other constructions that superficially resemble partitive genitives, and they less often hear iets leuk without the S ending in other constructions. So they've become really accustomed to hearing iets verkeerd without the S, but less so iets leuk. All right, so that's step 3. And then step 4 is that language users store unanalyzed chunks of language as ready-mades in their memory. So they store the entire chunk, iets verkeerd, as such in their memory. And they also access this chunk as a whole, as an unanalyzed whole, when they're producing language. And that's crucial, of course, because that leads us to our prediction, namely that when we look at actual partitive genitives, completely unambiguous partitive genitives, that language users will be more inclined to drop the S ending for iets verkeerd than for iets leuk. Why? Well, because they've become so accustomed to hearing iets verkeerd without the S ending, based on other constructions that has nothing to do with partitive genitives. Well, they have not become accustomed to hearing that form for other lexical elements, such as iets leuk. All right, so quick recap in general terms. What do you need for constructional contamination? You need a morphosyntactic alternation, for instance, a variation, alternation between variant X and variant Y. Then you need another construction that may be completely unrelated, but that often looks like one of the variants on the surface. For instance, it often looks like variant X. That other construction needs to be highly frequent for word A. And then you need the theoretical assumption that language users store unanalyzed chunks of language as ready-mades in their memory. Take those 4 together and you get to the prediction that even among strictly unambiguous instances of the alternating construction, word A will be biased towards variant X. All right, that's the theory. Now enough with the theory, let's look at some data. Let's look at some case studies. So these are the case studies that we have on constructional contamination so far. We have 5 of them on Dutch. This is our work, and we have 1 on English, which is the work of Martin Hilpert and Susanne Flach. I'll of course be talking about the Dutch case studies. More specifically, I'll be talking about the first 2 and giving a quick overview of all the others. So I'll start with the first one on the partitive genitive. So you already know the drill with the partitive genitive, right? It's an alternation between a variant with S ending and a variant without S ending, such as, for instance, iets leuk versus iets leuks, iets verkeerd versus iets verkeerds, etc. So that's step 1. Now, as for steps 3 and 4, we found that strings that superficially resemble partitive genitives without the S ending are particularly frequent with the so-called assessment adjectives. So these are adjectives that express some kind of assessment, such as wrong, better, good, incorrect, etc. Right? And also among the color adjectives. So basically, language users are bombarded with strings such as iets verkeerd, niets verkeerd, iets beter, wat geel, veel blauw, etc. All of them in constructions that are not partitive genitives, and hence always appear without the S ending. All right, so that leaves us to this prediction. Even among strictly unambiguous partitive genitives, language users will be more inclined to drop the S ending for any phrases that contain these assessment adjectives or these color adjectives. So to test that, we built a data set containing only strictly unambiguous partitive genitives. And then we built a mixed effects regression model, so a logistic regression model that controlled for all other known factors to affect the alternation, and also included a random effect with random slopes for the individual partitive genitive phrases. And one of the predictors that we introduced into this model was adjective type, which distinguished between the assessment adjectives, the color adjectives, and all other adjectives. And then we looked at the effect plot of this variable, which visualizes the estimated probability of the variant without S ending, so estimated by the model. And we had predicted much more S omission among the assessment adjectives and the color adjectives than among all other adjectives. And that's also what we found. We can't really say anything about color adjectives because they were way too infrequent. You can already tell by the massive error bars here. But we did find the effect to be very, very outspoken for the assessment adjectives, which show a lot more S omission than all other adjectives. And this was in fact by far our most important predictor in our model. So the type of adjective. All right, so that's great, of course. Prediction got confirmed. All right, so that was our first case study. Now, as for a second case study, that looked into verbal clusters. So this is a word order alternation, basically, an alternation between a order where the verbal participle precedes the auxiliary versus an order where the auxiliary precedes the verbal participle. And you can find that alternation in subordinate clauses in Dutch. For instance, in dat de deur net door John gesloten is. So literally that the door just by John closed is. That the door has just been closed by John. Versus dat de deur net door John is gesloten. That the door just by John is closed. With the same meaning, that the door has just been closed by John. So that's our alternation. Now, we also have another construction that superficially looks like one of the variants, and that's the combination of an adjective plus a copula. For instance, in dat de deur al geruime tijd gesloten is, so that the door already sometime closed is. Here, gesloten functions as an adjective and is functions as a copula. And in those constructions, only this order is possible. Only gesloten is possible because the verb goes entirely at the end in subordinate clauses in Dutch. All right, so that leads us to this prediction. The more often a participle is used as an adjective, the more often it will appear in the order verbal participle plus auxiliary in unambiguously verbal instances. And we have to add, this should only be the case with the auxiliaries zijn and worden. Why only with those auxiliaries? Well, because those are the only auxiliaries in Dutch that can double as copula. So this other construction only occurs with copula, of course, and hence only with zijn and worden. All right, so that's prediction 1. So I repeat it here, the more often a participle is used as an adjective, the more often it will appear in a participle plus auxiliary order in unambiguously verbal instances. So among instances with verbal participles, with the auxiliaries zijn and worden. So this means in practice, for instance, that gesloten, closed, would prefer the participle plus auxiliary order when compared to geopend. Why? Well, because gesloten very often appears as an adjective, whereas geopend does not. It can appear as an adjective, but it does so way less frequently. All right. So then we reasoned. Okay, well, when that is the case, when the effect of constructional contamination is present with these auxiliaries, from there the effect might then spread. So it might spread from the auxiliaries zijn and worden to other auxiliaries, such as say hebben, which is have in English. So that leads us to prediction 2. The same lexical bias might also appear among verbal clusters with other auxiliaries, but it should definitely be weaker. It should be weaker because it's only a secondary effect, right? Constructional contamination only directly affects verbal clusters with zijn and worden, and only indirectly, secondarily, you could say, affects other verbal clusters or verbal clusters with other auxiliaries. All right, so to test this prediction, we got a data set from Gert de Sutter, with the auxiliaries zijn, worden, and hebben, so be, become, and have. De Sutter had already meticulously distinguished between unambiguous and ambiguous verbal clusters. We only looked at the unambiguous verbal ones. And then we calculated for each participle a measure which was higher, we call this adjectiveness, which was higher the more often a participle was used as an adjective in the corpus of spoken Dutch. All right. Then we built a regression model, first only for verbal clusters with the auxiliaries zijn and worden. And then we looked at the effect plot of adjectiveness. So we had predicted that the more often a participle is used as an adjective in in other instances, so in non-verbal instances, of course, because it's used as an adjective, the more often it would appear in the participle plus auxiliary order. So we had predicted the positive effect of adjectiveness of the verbal participle on the estimated probability of the participle plus auxiliary order. And that's also what we found. We had found a very, very strong and clearly positive effect. So that's great. Our first prediction is confirmed.
And let's try to conclude now, because
okay.
you're big 18 minutes. So try to conclude in the next few minutes.
Right. So our second prediction basically is also confirmed. However, the effect was predicted to be weaker, which is the case, and its effects in effect so weak that it's no longer significant. So we can't really say that our second prediction was confirmed as well. As for the conclusions, so I planned on quickly wrapping over the other case studies, but I'll just list them here and skip over them. Basically, we found confirmatory evidence in all of them in varying degrees. But if you take all of them together, we can be quite confident that constructional contamination is an actual effect, and sometimes even a very, very strong and outspoken effect. All right, so quick recap. What do you need? You need an alternation. So you need variant X and variant Y. You need another construction that often looks like one of the variants on the surface. So for instance, another construction that looks like variant X. It's usually pretty easy to find those other constructions if you're trying to find instances of your alternation in your corpus, and you keep on finding instances of another construction. Then that would be a good candidate, because that typically looks like one of your variants. The other construction needs to be more frequent for particular words. So for instance, more frequent for word A than for word B, which is always the case. And finally, you need the theoretical assumption that language users store unanalyzed chunks as ready-mates in their memory. If you have those four, then you can test for constructional contamination by checking the following prediction. Even among strictly unambiguous instances of the alternating construction, word A will be biased towards variant X. All right, if you want to know more, here are our papers. They should all be available in open access. If you can't find them, just send me an email and I'll happily send them to you. So this is all research on Dutch, basically. If you don't like Dutch, as I said, there's also research on English by Martin Hilbert and Susanna Flach. Their paper is still forthcoming and should be published in the next couple of months. But if you're already curious and you can't wait, you can also look at Martin's book on construction grammar, namely in the second edition. In chapter 3, there's a section devoted to constructional contamination. All right, so thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll happily answer them.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you for also accommodating our technical problem. So we have actually 2 minutes, only 2 minutes for questions. So this is the time. I don't see any question in the chat. So if among the participants, someone wants to ask the question. Oh, Natalia, please.
Hi, Dirk. Very interesting presentation. Thanks. I was wondering if it's always observed in case of like these sequences, which are basically n-grams, so which are like chunks, or I don't know, high predictability, or is it? Can it be also more abstract? Can it be interruptions? So can it be more schematic? So is it really a contamination between constructions, or is it just a contamination between n-grams?
Well, so far we've always basically assumed you needed the n-grams, you needed the superficial resemblance, because once you go deeper, once you go to a more schematic level, the resemblance kind of disappears, right? For instance, for the partitive genitive, let's see if I'm still sharing my screen, right? We have oh, there we have it. Right, you have the superficial resemblance between these strings, but that resemblance is only present on the surface. Once you go to a more schematic level, the resemblance kind of disappears. Still, we have found that because we've also tried different measures of constructional contamination, well, basically different different ways of operationalizing constructional contamination. If you take into account like semantic similarity as well. Basically, if you calculate a measure on instances that also kind of look like your construction semantically, which is hard to explain in less than a minute, but that's one of the measures that we tried, then it becomes a better predictor of constructional contamination. So basically, it seems the closer you are, both formally and semantically, the stronger the effect becomes. I would expect that if there's also more similarity on a structural level, so if that is the case, then that would also make the effect stronger. though we haven't looked at that really yet.
Okay, thanks.